What's going on, guys? Welcome to An Invite to Peace. I am your host, Chad Campese, and we are here for one reason, and that's to help you guys thrive in life and faith the only way we know how. Let's go. Do all things really work together for good? All things? I mean, all things? What about the murder of a good man? What about a vision on a day that you never imagined you'd see? In a situation you'd never imagined you'd be a part of? As the crowd closes in and you can see her standing there, she's screaming, crying for help, and you have to make a decision that will haunt you for the rest of your life while her cries slowly go silent and the crowd around her takes over. Can God really work all things for good? Really? Is it all part of the plan? This week we've got Ward Jenkins, present and active in the middle, and I do mean right in the middle of the LA riots that so many of us watched unfold on TV so long ago. I'm showing my age here. We talk life, death, health, and the darkness of humanity. What happens when you're not fine? Is this really what God intended? Can he use it for good? Ward thinks he can. Ward knows he will. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and take a minute right now, again, yes, right now before our conversation, if you haven't already, and you are a returning listener, hit that pause button, throw on a review, subscribe to the podcast. You came back for a reason. Let people know. You could literally be saving lives and families not only for today, but for eternity. And again, no pressure. All right, guys, after you do that, come on back. My conversation with Ward Jenkins. All right, I'm here tonight with Ward Jenkins. Ward, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
You have a lot of life experience. I won't say you're old, but you have a lot of life experience that
Yeah, it's okay. I'm a little old too, but I'm here, so it's all good.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. We jump right into dark times, painful times in our lives. And a big reason I do that is it seems like, especially having done all of these interviews so far, it seems like those are the times that God comes in the most. Dark times, painful times, times that we find out that we can't control things, times that we find out that life is not something that we can say, I want this, this, and this, and everything's going to happen the way we thought it was. It seems like, for whatever reason, that's when God has that soil that he can come in and kind of cultivate and make a bigger impact. Can you give me just a background on kind of your quick history of what you did, where you're at now?
I was with LAPD for 24 years. I started in 1982, retired in 2006 as a sergeant. About 12 of those years were spent in patrol in 77th Division, which is South Central LA. And after retiring in 06, my family and I moved out to the Kansas City area to get my kids into better school environment than the LA area. And so we finished raising our sons here. I spent a few years as an associate pastor. We went to Arkansas for a few years to help with family. We came back like 6 years ago, and I'm a chaplain now with Overland Park Police Department, and that's in Kansas.
Gotcha. Very nice. So South Central LA, police officer.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you have a little different viewpoint and stories that I have here in Ohio, in Central Ohio.
Probably. It was, so I can give you the broad brush of 77th when I was there. 12 square miles, 160,000 people. We averaged 160 murders a year. It's just one division. And at the time I was there were 18 divisions in LAPD.
Wow. That's a lot, right?
Just put that it's a lot. And if you do per capita, if you break down per capita, Kansas City right now has a pretty high homicide rate. But if I do a per capita breakdown, I think we were 3 or 4 times as high when I was there. It's changed now. The demographics could change. 77th is still a pretty hot division, but it's not like it was.
Gotcha. So when I heard you talk the last time, obviously kind of where I want to go, I'd like you to kind of paint me a picture of something that, none of us have probably been involved in, but we all saw on TV, depending how old we are, obviously, but it's the
Yeah.
riot situation in South Central LA. You were right in the middle of all that. Can you paint that picture starting out from beginning for us?
Yeah, the LA riots started at the intersection of uh, Florence and Figueroa. If I can't, if I could be wrong on Figueroa. It was on Florence Avenue, and that it's in 77th Division. That's where the truck driver Reginald Denny was pulled out of his truck and beaten. And so that was the flashpoint. And it all started in 77th. I was working patrol at that time. I was assigned a graveyard shift, and so I was asleep when most of the news was breaking. And when I awakened, I think my wife might have called me. She was on the job at the time, and she said, "Man, you better look at the news. There's LA's there's a riot. It's out of control, and it started in 77." So um, I remember knowing that I was going to get called in. They hadn't called me yet, and so I went for a jog. I was running. I figured, I bet if I'm going to get my workout in, I'm going to get it in now. And so I went for a quick job, came home, and right as I was getting ready to shower, the phone rang, come to work, and I was like, okay. So I drove to
Real
work. Go ahead.
real quick, you were married at the time. You said your wife, was she a police officer as well? You said she was on the job, so I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
she was a police officer. Yeah, and yeah, so I heard from the news how bad things were, how out of control things were. So I remember I took a shotgun, put it on my front seat, and when I took the off ramp to exit to make my way on city streets from the freeway to 77th, it was chaos. They were stealing cars from a lot right at the off ramp. There was smoke and fire and flames, and I just figured out that I was not going to stop for any red lights, even though I was in my own personal car. And so that's what I just blew lights into the station and made sure I wasn't hitting anybody, obviously. But yeah, it was just it was crazy. Um, so I got to work at probably 7 o'clock that night. It was this is April. It was dark when I got there. It might have been 7:30, and so they they threw us into cars three deep. Normally we rode in two officers to a car, and but in any kind of a tactical occurrence, they put us into three officers in one car. So I was there, and then there was another car of three guys that got thrown together, and we tandem drove over to. We had a command post established. So in response to the riots that were out of control by this point, the department said, "Okay, we need a command post, and it's going to be over here at this bus yard." The bus yard took up pretty literally a city square block, it was a walled-in bus yard, if you will, but it took up a city block of space. And when I pulled my police car into this command post, there were fire engines and paramedics parked, engines off, that completely encircled this city block, just sitting, just not moving. And there were cops everywhere, and there were police cars everywhere. And so I stopped my car, pulled up to, it was kind of the front of the line. I don't know how that worked out. I guess they were probably moving cars as officers were arriving. And the first thing they told us to do was turn your radios and your car keys in. Now, this was kind of normal for LAPD at the time. If you showed up at a major unusual occurrence, they would take your equipment and then they would redisperse it as it was needed. So that part was normal. Hey, turn your car keys in, turn your radios in, and so I did. And I was told to go into a building and check in. And when I went into this building, there were hundreds of police officers. They're playing cards and sitting around on the floors. There was no place for us to sit, really, and it just had the appearance that everything had shut down, like we were just stuck. And I was like, wow. So there was somebody in there. I went to check in, and so, no, you don't check in here. We don't just don't check in here. You got to go outside and check in with the lieutenant that's out there. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I went outside and I found the lieutenant in charge, and I'm not going to name him. And I said, "Hey, Lieutenant, I'm checking in." And he says, "Well, you have to go in the building and check in." I said, "Well, I just did that, and they told me to come out and see you." And he said, "I don't know what the fuck's going on." He turns his back on me. One of the other officers that was there, walked up to me and said, "Hey, Jenkins, if I were you, I would get my equipment back." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, we've been here for hours. We're stuck here. If I were you, I'd get my equipment back." So I snuck over to the keyboard and got my car keys and my radios and got them back. And the other car with the 3 officers in it behind me, and then my 2 partners were all seated in their car because they were waiting for. I was the one senior lead in this whole group. I was a training officer at the time, and they were all just P2s, street cops, young police officers. So they were kind of waiting for me to take the lead. And so I got our equipment back and passed it back out, and I just said, "Sit tight." And then someone, a fire employee, because there were fire command trailers and police command trailers set up side by side that had been brought in. And one of the firefighters, I don't know what rank he was, but he said, Did you say you have 2 police cars? You guys are ready to go to work?" And I said, "Yeah," because I'd gotten all my stuff back, and I was like, "Well, now what do we do? How do we go to work?" And this fireman came up. He goes, "Well, see that fire chief over there with the scrambled eggs on his helmet? When he's not talking with someone, I want you to approach him and tell him that you have 2 police cars and you're ready to go to work." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So it took no more than 10 seconds, and he was free. And I jumped into the place because people were lining up to talk to him. And I said, "Excuse me, sir." And he goes, "Yes." I said, "I got 2 police cars, 6 officers. We're ready to go to work." He said, "You're kidding me." I go, "No, sir." He says, "Go inside that trailer." And he pointed to the fire trailer. And he said, "Get an assignment from them." I said, "Yes, sir." So I walked into this fire trailer. And inside the fire trailer, and when I got up there was a desk. And my captain and our detective lieutenant were standing there inside the fire trailer. And I greeted him, and I went right to the desk because I had been given my orders to get an assignment. And so
When
I
you
took it.
say when you say assignment, I'm assuming so the city at this point is probably shut down, right? Like they're not sending firemen out to runs, they're not sending cops out to runs. You guys are all stuck in this parking lot, really not going anywhere, and people are
So,
calling in, I'm sure.
so what had happened is that by this point, by the time I showed up at the command post, we had a firefighter that had been shot in the face. We had fire engines that had been turned over, literally turned over and set on fire. So, so LAFD was like, "Hey, we're not going to roll in anything until we get police escort." So the city was burning, and there was no fire response. So yes, everything shut down. And so I knew I was going to get an assignment to accompany the firefighters out. That was what was going to happen. And my captain said, "Jenkins, what are you doing? That you need to go, check in with the police inside the room where I had first gone." I said, I went in there, and they directed me back outside to talk to Lieutenant so and so. And he said, "Well, you got to talk to Lieutenant so and so." And I said, "Lieutenant so and so said he didn't know what the fuck was going on, and he turned his back on me."
Okay, so did anybody know what was going on? Really? Just
No,
from your perspective, did anybody have any clue what the heck to do in this situation?
no, no. So, and the other part of this is, now I didn't know this had happened, but there was a group of other. We were called Morning Watch. That was our. Some people call it Dog Watch. You call it graveyards. We were Morning Watch cops. We worked 11 p.m. to 8 in the morning, basically. And a bunch of the Morning Watch cops, and I didn't know this at the time. I found this out the next night. They went to work and didn't go to the command post, and they went out and started handling radio calls. And they rode 4 deep. There were I think 2 cars of 4 deep, and they were the only cars that were out handling radio calls in 77th Division that night. So, and I did hear throughout my first night, I heard radio traffic, so I knew those guys were out there, and I recognized their voices. And I heard them. I heard my buddy request an ambulance for a woman who had been shot multiple times. And I'm not kidding you, after 20 or 25 minutes, they threw in a police car and took her to the hospital because nobody was coming. That's how bad it was. It was just a nightmare. So my captain had told me to do this. I told him, "Hey, Lieutenant turned his back on me. He doesn't know what's going on." The lieutenant that was standing next to him, and both of these men, the lieutenant has passed on now. He was a great guy. The captain is a great guy, and he promoted to commander later. I have a lot of respect for him. And they had all been at this command training. They had all, for whatever reason, Chief Gates had called for all of the command leaders in the city to go out of the city and have this command meeting of some kind. So they all came in late in their cities. My captain and this lieutenant were in their civilian clothes. And so they got there late. I'm sure by the time they got there, it was out of control too. And the lieutenant grabbed the captain's arm and said, "Cap, he's going to work. Let him go." Meaning it's the time for us to follow protocol and try to go through channels we can't. At least we got somebody that's going to go out and do something at this point. So I stepped up to the desk. There was a firefighter behind the desk with a headset on, taking calls, and I said, "I have two police cars ready to go." And he had such emotion in his voice, and he said, "You're kidding me." I go, "No." He goes, "Okay, here's your first call." And he was writing on a little notepad, and he tore the paper off, and he gave me an address, and he said, "This is a 2-year-old that stopped breathing 2 hours ago. That's your
Oh
first
my.
call. That's your first call."
2 hours ago.
And he said, "Your job is to go before and after the, I think they call it a strike force. If there's any firefighters listening, I'll probably get it wrong, but it was this detail of fire apparatus that involved, if I'm not mistaken, there was like a battalion chief's SUV, 2 or 3 fire engines, and an ambulance, a rescue ambulance that all. So we took up about a city block of space with a police car in front and a police car behind, and that's how I went through the city that night, leading them from fire to fire to fire to fire. And yeah, so and a lot of, and this, the stress of that night was that uh, we were being given assignments that weren't just in 77th where I worked. They were even in the county. They were outside the city. And so I wasn't completely familiar with all the streets for A. And then B, if I'm in the lead car and I'm driving, I'm picking the route where all of my fire guys have to be able to get through with me. I can fit a police car through tight spaces, but not the fire engines. So I would come up toward an intersection and there would be a big major firefighting thing going on at this intersection, and I couldn't go through it. I had to figure out a way to go around it. And maybe that meant alleys if the alley was wide enough, and if the alley wasn't. Anyway, it was very chaotic and very stressful. Just getting around town was hard. Was hard that night.
I'm
And
curious. Can you
yeah,
tell me, back at the command post, that parking lot where everybody was at, fire was set up, police were set up. You said there was all these officers in the building kind of just waiting to do something.
yeah.
Did they just end up staying there? Did they actually eventually go out and be, was there any, or they just kind of sat in that parking lot and were like, this is just too bad. We can't do anything. There's nothing we really can do at this point.
That they were stuck. There's a dangerous mentality that we can get as police officers of, and if you work a real busy area, this is especially true, where my job is to respond to radio calls and that's it. Now, there were some nights when I worked 77th Division on graveyard shift when I would handle 22, 24 radio calls. And these weren't just all loud radio calls. They were robbery just occurred, shooting just occurred, loud radio, group disturbing the peace, gang members fighting, everything, burglar there now. But 24 calls in an 8-hour shift would be a busy night for us. But so there were times when I came to work, that's all I did was I was a slave to the radio, and that I think that creeps into our minds sometimes, where I'm just going to go to work and do what they tell me to do. This night, I could see that we were stuck. Like when I showed up and we weren't going out, it was like, I'm no, I'm going out one way or another. And so I kind of defied orders to go out, if you will, although I got the blessing of my captain in the end. The next night when I came to work, I showed up in a roll call and they told us, okay, you guys are all going over to the command post. And my regular partner was there, great guy. He had over 20 years on the street, and he grabbed my arm and he said, "Don't go, Ward, just sit tight." So roll call ended and everybody filed out except there were 14 of us or something like that stayed behind, and a couple of sergeants. And we simply went out and got into police cars and started handling radio calls, and we defied orders. So it was basically a mutiny. And it's the only time in my career I ever disobeyed orders. But I knew from the night before that if we went to the command post, it's not, we're not going to do any good. I remember getting a phone call from my wife. Um, oh, it had to be on day one, night one at some point. I can't remember how we ended up talking, but maybe it was at the end of day one. And she said, "How are you?" "I'm fine." "You okay?" "I'm fine." And she goes, "Ward, I went to the command post and I just sat there for hours. There were hundreds of us just sitting there." I go, "I know, I got out." She goes, "How did you get out?" And I go, "I'll tell you later." But so, yeah, I know for a fact that command post just stayed idle with cops just sitting, doing nothing, which was
Gotcha.
part of why the riots were such a, because parts of LA, in other parts of LA, that not in South Central, but the rioters were starting to spread obviously into other areas, and I'm sure you could find even in the county there were people that tried to riot. if a different division responded and sort of was I would say assertive and let's go in and disperse those rioters, everything took care of itself. That's what the nature of police work is. If you sit back and let people go wild, they'll go wild. And a well-disciplined group of even 12 officers can back a crowd of 100 off easily. And I did it in my career at different times. So I know this works. You just have to be willing to do that. So, yeah, so the first night was just leading this fire strike force around, fighting fire to fire. Um,
Did you
uh,
did you end up going on the call for the 2-year-old, the one that had stopped breathing
we
for 2 hours?
we got there. The fire department did because it was a medical call and they were Spanish speaking. So I don't know what the resolve was of that. I never found out whether the child lived or died, or I mean, my sense is the people didn't seem to be in complete grief. So I'm believing somehow it worked out okay, but it wasn't even like it was like I wanted to know, but I wasn't. You
Right.
know, we're moving on to the next call. We're done here. Okay, we got back in our cars and we left.
How long did it last? Or how long? How many nights
Well,
or how many
I,
days?
I was out for that first night from I think probably I was probably rolling by 8 p.m. and I think I didn't get relieved until close to noon the next day. At some point the next day, um, we ended up at this major intersection fighting a fire, and there were basically fires burning on all four corners of this big intersection, and our fire was the furthest one to the north, and there was nothing north of us. So you just have to sort of visualize a map where there's fires being fought, everything to the south. There's police now that are escorting those fire strike forces. By now, it's 12 hours, 14 hours into the riots. People are going out with the fire department. We're with our crew still. And we have to string out as officers, get out of our car and protect the firefighters who are going to fight the fire. And so my position at the north end was the most exposed. And there were, like I said, there were no other officers up to the north. My younger officers I put down behind me to the south. They had other officers and other firefighters south of them. So that it's almost like a battle line. I put myself on the point. Does that make sense? I'm exposed.
Yeah.
Because I was the senior guy and I felt like this is where I should be. And I was taking bottles and rocks and people were throwing spark plugs at us and it was just weird, you know.
How about shooting? Were there people hanging fire?
Nobody shot at us that night at all. There were a lot of homicides. There were a lot of officer-involved shootings that took place that night, but we didn't have any. When I say a lot, there were officer-involved shootings that took place the first night, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or something. Um, and that which is a lot in one night
Yeah. Yeah.
in one
Yeah.
part of the city. The worst thing that happened to me, Chad, was that I was like I said I was standing at the edge of my line protecting my firefighters and my cops. And there was an auto parts store that was probably, I mean, it's been a while now. It's been 19, this is 1992. I bet it's 40 or 40 yards away, 50 yards away. And there's a group of individuals who are bending up the security bars, the sliding security grating bars that will cover a business. And they're bending these up. And there's a woman inside and she's screaming for help and she's yelling to me to help her.
She can see you and you can see her, or
Yeah. Yeah, I can see her behind the bars and she's yelling at me for help. And so I have to make a decision on what I'm going to do. And I knew that we had no backup. I knew that I could run up there and maybe I could overpower the 5 or 6 guys that were there and chase them off, maybe. But if I did that, I was going to expose my firefighters. And we'd already had, like I said, we already had a firefighter shot in the face. We already had, and so I had to make a choice on whether or not to respond to her or to simply stand my ground. And I chose to stay. I chose to stay and protect my firefighters because that was my mission. And I can still hear her cries dying out as they get inside to her. And that's not something I'll ever unhear. And it's not something I'll ever be okay with. Although I've relived it enough times to know that I had to make a choice and that I made it. I made the best choice. I think I would make the same choice again. I think it was just now we understand what this is. As we would call this a moral injury, in that my choosing to not help her violated my personal ethics, and that's what makes it so hard to deal with. But I can tell you that all my firefighters went home that night, and all my officers went home that night. You know, and that was the hardest thing that happened to me during the riots. The other part of the riots was just the sheer magnitude of the law breaking public, like seeing hundreds of people looting stuff with stuff on their cars that they're hanging onto the roof, they're hanging onto mattresses and furniture, and they're filing out of the city. These people have come in from even out of the city of LA, and they've looted, and they're driving out, and just seeing the like hundreds and thousands of looters. It was just it really spun me on a deeper level, like, and this isn't during the riots, because when it's all happening, you're looking and going, oh, this is crazy, and then you go do your next thing. But I would say in the weeks after, when things really started to calm down, I did a lot of soul searching and a lot of reflecting on like what I saw during the riots, and part of me was like, why am I doing this job? Because there's so much evil out there. It's overwhelming. Like, what good am I doing? And the only way for me to reconcile it was that I actually went into a mathematical breakdown. I'm a little bit analytical sometimes, and I said, okay, there's 160,000 people that live in 77th Division. I knew that. And then I asked myself, how many people did you see looting, Ward? Well, let's just say I saw 10. I didn't see 10,000, but let's just say it was 10,000. It was probably closer to 3,000 or 2,000. But let's say it was 10,000. That means 150,000 people were locked in their houses, scared to death. Okay. Okay. Humanity's still okay. That's how I reconciled it in my heart, to deal with like what I had seen from society.
Well, take us. So your faith, religion, faith, views of God. What did that look like, if it there was there at all, during that point of the riots, during that point when you were employed as an officer with your wife? What did you guys' background look like in that area? Was there anything present at all, or?
So yeah, at the point of the riots, I was definitely had faith, and I was walking with Jesus, and I was on track, and my wife was too. Earlier in my career, if we back up, 1988, I'm working with a buddy of mine from the academy, and we had gone through the academy together. We graduated. He went to Hollenbeck, which is kind of East LA. I went to downtown LA for my first year, and then I ended up, when I transferred into 77th, about probably my 2 year mark, he was there. Danny was there. And so Danny and I connected as partners. We worked together for 4.5 years. We worked patrol, vice, narcotics, gangs, everything that we could do, we did. We had a lot of fun. He was a good, hardworking cop. He was married, had kids. I was single. And there was a problem in 77th with Hispanic women being robbed, and they were afraid to report it. Now you got to remember, this is 1988. They were afraid to report it because of fear of being deported. They were there illegally, and our captain wasn't cool with that. He was like, "No, we're going to catch these robbers because we got to protect these women. It doesn't matter that they're citizens or not. This is wrong." So they decided to form an undercover robbery apprehension detail. And boy, Dan and I, are you kidding me? Undercover catching robbers? Let's do that. That sounds like a lot of fun. So we both applied to get into the unit that they just formed, and Danny got in, and I did.
Well,
So,
and really, I
so
mean, let's let all this stuff that you guys have done the past 5 years. I
it's
mean,
all been together.
is it a stretch for me to say he's probably your best friend at this point? This
Oh
is, you guys
yeah,
are joined at the
yeah,
hip.
yeah, absolutely. We've gone through a lot. And when we did narcotics task force together. I mean, we were making I think in the 9 months that I was in there, I think we made 1,500 arrests for sales of cocaine. I mean, we broke into fortified rock houses. We went in foot pursuits. We went in car chases. We did everything together. So yeah, we were tight, and we were working a very busy division, and so everything we did was kind of high octane and catching bad guys.
And so back then with Danny, I guess maybe the riots, we were a little ahead of ourselves. Back then with Danny, Where was your faith at that point? Had you grown up with a faith? Did you have it? What was that?
So I grew up going to church. My mom taught me to pray at night. My dad never talked to me about it too much. He let mom kind of do the leading on that. When I was a junior in high school, I met this girl who knew Jesus, and I could see that she had something in her life that was really cool, that was meaningful and real. And so I started asking questions, and she gave me a Bible. It was the Living Bible, that like a New Living Translation, real easy to read. And in my junior year of high school, I invited Christ into my heart. And I'd say for a high school kid, I did pretty good. I mean, I wasn't perfect, but junior year, senior year, high school, and first year of college, my first year of college, I went to Long Beach State, and I got connected with this group called the Navigators. They're still around today. The Navigators are a great organization. They're really big on Bible verse memorization. That's one of the things that they stress, that you memorize verses, so that if you're ever in a time of need and you don't have a Bible in front of you, you got a verse that you can recall. Anyway, then sophomore year of college, I just wanted to party. I started to drift and chasing women, and so at this point in my life, I had asked a lot of questions. I mean, being a cop, I saw a lot of stuff that I couldn't really understand. I didn't know if people like I got a call one day for a baby under the influence of PCP,
Oh my.
and which meant that we then had to go to the house and impound all the other kids that lived in the house where the baby was at, that got contacted with the PCP. So we had 5 kids in custody. They were all little, and their dad was a gang member. And I'm writing reports. I'm in the station, and this 5-year-old kid, this boy, walks past me. He's one of the kids that I've impounded, that we're going to place into protective custody. And he looks at my pistol as he's walking by me, and he says, "Ooh, that one of them guns that goes like this." And he slaps his fist to the palm of his hand, and then he just keeps walking. And what he was showing me was that he recognized that my gun was a semi-automatic pistol, and that the magazine goes in the butt of the gun. He knew that at 5 years old. He already had a gang moniker. He already had a nickname. They already called him Lil Boo or whatever it was. So he was going to grow up to be a gang member. There's no doubt like that. So a lot of my sort of philosophical self was like, man, do people even have a chance down here? Is there any hope? And so all that was percolating in the back of my mind at the time that this unit started, and that Danny got in and I didn't. Does that explain it? Is that clear for you?
Yeah, a little bit. I was just curious. Just go back real quick with me, because you hear. So I've talked to a lot of people. It's very interesting, and you may not have experienced this or not. A lot of guys, it seems like a lot of guys' faith journey starts with, I met this girl, and I met this girl, and she seemed to have something. So I got a Bible, and she brought me to church. It's amazing how many guys' stories start with
Yeah,
that, actually.
yeah.
But I'm curious, well, you had that same situation. You said, you invited Jesus into your heart, read the Bible. What does that look like to you? Do you think, looking back on it now, inviting Jesus into your heart, kind of getting into it then, was there a substantial, actual, relationship impact from God, or was it just something you were kind of exploring, something you were kind of curious about? You kind of went through the steps because you heard that that's what you were supposed to do. But was there any real impact from that at all, or what?
There
What did
was.
that look like?
There was. It was a real step of faith for me. It was a real conversion, if you will. That's how I see it. Um, and it even though, and we'll start getting off into a little bit of the faith journey. We can be saved and still be carnal in some ways.
Got to start
And
somewhere.
yeah. And that's how I would describe it. I was saved. I knew Jesus. Even though at this time in my life there wasn't fruit in my life. If someone else had met me at this point in time, they wouldn't have gone, "Hey, Ward's a Christian." Now, I was making good decisions. I was treating people well. I wasn't a bad cop at all. I wasn't a thief. I wasn't violent. I was a good cop, and I still believed in helping people and doing good things. So, yeah, the conversion was real. I don't doubt that. When I think about the time I came to Christ, it was as a junior in high school. Now, that's not the end of my story, you know,
Right.
because the story progresses, and so now I go to the sergeant that's in charge of been put in charge of this new unit. I go, hey, Bobby, when are you going to get me in the unit? Ward, be patient. I'm allowed one training officer. Danny's a training officer,
So this is after Danny got in and you got rejected.
and I got
I'm sorry.
rejected. And
I'm sorry. That was a little harsh. That is. I
no,
rejected
that's
probably
that's
wasn't
what
the
it was. He
right
picked
word.
Danny. He picked Danny over me, absolutely.
Right. Gotcha.
And I it was a good pick. Danny had been a Marine. He was a good cop. Absolutely. I actually didn't have any like that didn't bother me. Like yeah, I would have picked Danny over me too.
Gotcha.
Um, and so he was like, "Be patient. I'll get you in." And the other thing, Ward, is I need minority officers because we're undercover in South Central LA, and you and Danny are white, and so it was like, okay, he'll get me in. I'll be patient. So they'd been doing great work. They'd set a female officer a decoy out with a purse and wait for her to get thrown to the ground and her purse snatched, and then they would jump out of the bushes and out of cars and they'd chase the guy down. And it was a good. They were getting good robbery convictions, and they were kind of going hucklebuck catching bad guys. And it was Labor Day weekend in 1988, September 3rd, Friday night. Their unit was going to be. I'm in gangs at this point. Their unit is they're going to be off the rest of the weekend, and so they don't want to catch robbers that night because they know how close they keep coming to shooting people, and it's very very dangerous. And so there was a liquor store that was getting broken into, and they thought, let's just surveil the liquor store and catch a burglar. Let's do an easy low key detail tonight and go home and enjoy the rest of the weekend off.
And this is
Well,
something that Danny is working, but you're not around, right?
correct. And so Danny and his partner are sitting, they're undercover in a Camaro, in a rental car. They hear a rifle fire very close by. It's dark, it's 8 o'clock, 8:30 at night. And they see headlights of a car come around the corner and kind of wash into their faces. The car speeds away and they go, wow, we think there's been a drive-by shooting and we think those are probably the suspects. And so they peel out, do a U-turn, and start following the suspects. Sure enough, they encounter the suspects in a parking lot. They see that there's a female driving, there's a male, and he's got an AR-15. And they almost have a confrontation, but the suspects take off. There's heavy traffic. There's a lot of street cruisers that are out on a Friday night in 77th. Back then, they probably still do it. And the suspects pulled into a corner gas station, and Danny told his partner to pull up on a sidewalk where they were like 140 feet away, 150 feet away, good enough distance that they weren't going to push it because they knew they were outgunned. Well, the suspects made a U-turn out of the parking lot, came back. The male leaned out the passenger window and just opened up on them. And the car that Danny and his
With
partner
the
were
with the AR-15.
with the AR, and the car that
Yeah.
the Danny and his partner were in got hit 17 times. In fact, one of the bullets went through both, so there was an 18th one that went through both open windows and missed everything.
Oh, wow.
Danny was killed. Danny was hit one time. He shot back. The partner shot back. Suspects got away. And so I heard the help call. I knew it was their unit. I didn't know who it was, but through a series of events, I was able to piece together that Danny had been killed.
Were you on duty at this point somewhere
I,
when you heard the
yeah,
help call? Okay.
I was I was at a restaurant ordering dinner when the help call came out, and I'd already paid. We threw our food down. We ran out because we knew it was bad. Officer down, officer needs help. There's nothing that's going to stop any of us from going to that. And so we headed back toward the division. I went into a neighborhood where I believed the suspects would be headed. I was a block away, Chad. I found the identical car. You know how the American car makers, you have the GM cars that are all the same. You got Ford and Lincoln Mercury even back then. A Mustang and a Capri had the same body style, and the old Cutlass with the Buick, whatever. There was a lot. Well, I found the right color, just the wrong make. I mean, and it turns out I later learned that the actual suspects were one block away from me that night, but I missed them, and I think it was probably good that I did because I probably would have been killed too. Um, so I went to the station when I figured out it was Danny because I was pretty well done. There's no way I was going to go on working.
How did you find out it was Danny?
I was at the state when I stopped. I knew we were looking for a male and a female in this particular type color car, and I got them, and I stopped them, and I detained them. They didn't seem right to me, but I went inside their house. They were cooperative. I didn't even handcuff them at this point, and I called the station. And I said, "This is what I got." You know, they go, "Nah, that's not them, Ward." And I go, "Well, so tell me who was it that got shot?" "I don't have that information." "Well, what's the condition of the officer?" Um, well, the officer's dead. So I was like, okay, that's all they would tell me on the phone. So I left. I was driving back toward the station. One of my buddies had a bunch of gang members jacked up. He was trying to shake people down. We're all trying to figure out who did this. And after we let them go, he talks to me and he goes, "I don't know how Danny's doing, Ward." And I go, "What do you mean, you mean Danny's the one that got shot?" He goes, "Yeah, Danny was shot, but I don't know his condition."
But you knew.
I said, "Well, I know his condition. He's dead."
Yeah.
And that was it. So I went to the station. Um, One of the greatest things that happened that night, if there's any cops out there, especially if there's any cops out there, I don't care who you are, don't be afraid to walk up and hug an officer. I got a hug from the sergeant from Bobby Green. He caught me as I was walking in the back door of the police station. He just didn't say a word to me. He just hugged me, and that was one of the most powerful, you know, positive things that came out of that night. So don't be afraid to hug another officer, even if we don't normally hug each other. Cops are kind of, we're pretty macho. But if it's something like this, don't worry about it. So the captain came in from home. The chaplain came in from home. He was a Catholic priest. He was our chaplain. The captain wanted me to go out with him to notify Danny's wife, and then Danny's brother-in-law lived next door to her, literally, and so we did both those notifications back to back, and then told told Danny's wife that he'd been killed, and it was rough. It was just a very, very hard time. Danny was such a good guy. Um, he had 3 kids. His wife was pregnant with their fourth.
Oh, wow.
They'd been high school sweethearts. Moved out from Ohio to L.A. Youngstown was where he was from, and yeah, so it was just rough. And then the funerals, the eulogy, all of that stuff, pallbearer,
Oh, yeah.
all that was going on. It was horrible, and my response to this when I would get home at the end of the shift in order to get to sleep is I just figured, I'll just start drinking. I'll pour myself a 16-ounce tumbler with a couple of ice cubes, 12 ounces of dark rum, and about 2 or 3 ounces of Diet Coke on top. And then I would slam it. I would guzzle it.
Wow.
And,
That's a lot.
and I would walk upstairs because I knew it was going to hit me. And then it would hit me and I'd pass out and I'd go to sleep and then wake up, shave, shower, go to work, come home. How am I going to get to sleep? I'm depressed. I'm going to drink. How am I going to deal with my depression? I'm going to take a depressant. That's how I'm going to deal with it.
So you are not married at this point, is that right? Or you are?
No.
So single guy. That
Single guy
happens.
living alone.
Yeah, but you have a
Well,
faith. You have a faith background when this happens, or a
I
slight. What does
did.
that look like? Yeah.
It didn't look like anything. I was, in fact, one night I got on my couch and I pulled out my service pistol, Chad, and I stuck it in the roof of my mouth and I put my finger on the trigger and I started to put pressure on it. And the only thing that stopped me was that I thought about my family and I thought about, oh gosh, my parents, my brothers are going to find me. They're going to see, they're going to come clean up. I can't do it this way. So I put the gun down, stumbled upstairs, went to bed.
So no. A lot of times in these stories that I hear, when I really press and I ask, "Hey, when did God intervene? Did the Spirit do any kind of work in you? Did you hear a voice? Did you see a vision?"
So
Nothing. God didn't do.
not yet. But
Right.
it couldn't have been more than a day or two later, night or two later. I'm home. I've got the bottle of rum in my hand. I've got the cup with the ice cubes in it. I'm in my kitchen. I live alone in a little condo, and I hear a voice. The voice asks me, "Ward, what are you doing?" Now, this wasn't an audible, like I was turning around looking for who was speaking to me. This was a voice inside my head that was very clearly speaking to me and asking me a question. "Ward, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm getting drunk." And he said, "Tell me how you're going to feel tomorrow." And I said, oh, and I had to think because I had to process the question. How am I going to feel tomorrow? Let me think about this. I'm going to drink. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to pass out. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to wake up. Well, tomorrow when I wake up, this was my response. Tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to feel just like I feel right now. Right now, I feel crappy. I'm going to feel crappy tomorrow. And then he said, look into that bottle and tell me what answers you see inside. So I looked in the bottle and I swirled the rum around, and there were no answers. And so in my thought prayer, whatever, how you want to say it, my prayer language, I said that there are no answers in here. And then he asked me two questions right after the other. Right, he said, Ward, are you a believer? Do you believe in me? Those were his exact words. Well, I'm having a conversation with who I know is God. And so, am I a believer? Of course, I'm a believer. I tell people now, I felt like Homer Simpson at this point. Yes, I'm a believer. And then his final question to me was, have you bothered talking with me about this? And I said, no. And I poured out the rum and I dumped the ice out, and the bottle went in the trash. And I said two words out loud that night. I said, now what? Because I felt like the one tool I was using to cope with everything had just been shown to, not be worth anything. And I looked across my living room, and on my little coffee table was a Bible that I had not opened in, if this is 88, I left college in 82, 6 years. I hadn't opened this Bible. I'm sure I hadn't read a passage in the Bible in 6 years. In fact, it goes back farther than that, because I started straying in my second year of college. So probably more like, 8 years or whatever. Anyway, but I knew if God wanted to talk to me, it was going to be in his Bible. I knew that much, because now I'm back in the mode of, I'm remembering what it's like to be a Christian. I'm remembering what it's like to have a relationship with God and to read my Bible. And I know that that's where he's going to meet me. So I went over and I sat down, picked up my Bible, and then I didn't know where to turn to. Now, one of the things the navigators taught me, which it's actually kind of humorous, but I share it. This is what they said: never randomly read your Bible. And here's the example. You open your Bible and it says, Judas went and hanged himself. You close your Bible, you open it again, and you read, now therefore, go and do likewise. And so they said, never randomly read your Bible. And so I was like, okay, I can't randomly read my Bible. Where am I going? What am I going to read? And immediately, Romans 8:28, which is a verse that I had memorized in 1978, came back into my brain. 10 years earlier, I'd memorized it. And, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. That's the gist of the verse. I might have a couple of misquotes. That's what it says. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And as soon as I read that verse, I knew that God had just spoken to me. And there are times I can read my Bible for a half hour and it's all good, but I don't have an epiphany. But I had an epiphany when I read that one verse. And I closed my Bible as soon as I read it. That was it. We were done.
Okay.
Conversational.
Just to be clear, when you were having this conversation in your head with God, you had not yet started drinking, right? You were getting ready to start
Correct.
drinking, but you had not
Correct.
yet start. Just for clarity for the audience, yeah, you
Yeah.
weren't clearly.
Stone sober. Stone sober.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Yep.
And
And
were you
and if it
verbally talking back, or you were
no, nothing was
no?
verbal. It was all in my thought.
Okay, gotcha.
Just I would call it a prayer thought, or however you want to say that. Nothing out loud. The only two words I said out loud were now
Now
what?
what? Yeah.
And so, and I knew, Chad, I knew, like, in this time span, I'm a little fuzzy on how many days it was that I did the heavy drinking, probably 7 or 10 day span. I knew that I was turning into I knew I was going to turn into an alcoholic. I knew that. Like, rationally, I knew it and I didn't care. It was like a destructive thing, I think. So I read Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. And I closed my Bible and I went back into my prayer language thought. And I said, okay, God, you mean to tell me you're going to take the murder of my best friend and somehow turn it into something good? That's what you're telling me. And the final things he said to me that night, the two words he said were, trust me. And so I thought, okay, so no more booze. I would come home from work and read Psalms. I decided I'd go into Psalms. That would seem like a good place to go. And I would just keep my nose clean and I would just keep going to work and it would all be fine. during this time, I'm on special detail to go out to Danny's house to help because this is still the aftermath of everything, and so that's kind of what's going on in the background. Is every day I'm going out to her house, I'm seeing her kids. Her kids are talking to me about their dad's death, about things like that. So there was still a lot of, I would say, exposure to trauma, if you will. There was no escaping it, really. I was kind of a liaison for her family.
So
Um,
tell me this. If I could push back just a little bit, maybe
yeah,
it's not worth it, or maybe I don't know how you'd respond. But so I have been a part of 3 line of duty deaths. One early in my career, and 2 on the same day in the same call later in my career. The first one, uh, I will say probably rocked my faith more than the last 2. I was in a much better space for those. But thinking back on those and hearing that voice, all things work together for good. God will make all things work together for good. I'm a very cynical person. I'm also very, I don't want to say intellectual in a smart way, but intellectual is where I think way too much. I overthink everything normally.
right.
And I question just constantly. Um, when that happened to you and you heard that voice and you read that verse, was that really the end of it for you? You just
No,
accepted that and you were like,
I,
oh, okay, well, or was there a conflict there as you went through it for the days coming, or you really just
so
were able to trust?
so what I at that point I was able to trust. Like I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand what that meant, but I trusted that if God said it, it was going to be true. Okay. A few nights later, I was home, maybe a week later at the most, probably just a few days. Like I said, it's a little hard to keep everything in straight and timeline now. It's so long ago. The phone rings. It's the sergeant calling me at home. He goes, Ward. And I go, Sergeant Green, what? Um, it's, we didn't get calls at home. If you need to talk to an officer, you show up at the station. There's a note. You see the sergeant there anyway. He goes, hey, I want to ask you a question. And I'm like, okay. He says, would you be willing to come into the unit and take Danny's place? And I immediately was like I recognized this was sovereign. This was God's hand at work somehow. So immediately I was like, well, yeah, of course I would. That's not how I wanted to get in the unit, but yes, of course I would. And he said, well, there's a catch. He goes, Danny's partner survived the shooting. They want to come back to work. They haven't come back to work yet. I knew I was going to call you. And on the chance that you were going to say yes, I said to them, hey, what if Ward came in and replaced Danny? Would you come back to work with Ward as your partner? And they said, yeah, I know Ward. Ward and Danny they worked together for years. They were class. Yeah, I'd work with Ward. Sure.
This was Danny's old partner that said he'd work with
That,
you.
that survived the shooting that night.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I said, yeah, no problem. I'm a training officer. I would take a rookie out of the academy first day out of the academy, and we'd go patrol the most violent part of LA together. And I could teach him the ropes. So I could bring a seasoned cop back, That officer had 3 years on the job at the time. So yeah, that's easy. So I went into the unit. I started working with this gal, and we fell in love, and we got married. And we just celebrated our 35th anniversary.
Wait a minute. We got to back that up. So, okay, I must have missed that the first time. So his partner was a female, obviously.
Yep.
This is the girl that you came in to replace him with in the unit,
Yep.
and that is who you ended up marrying.
Yep.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And we have two grown sons. My oldest is a police officer out here in Kansas City. We have our first granddaughter in life. We've been married 35 years. Chad, all things work together for good to those, it's conditional, who love God and are called according to his purpose. So this was a huge like this cemented my faith in Christ. Like when God opened this up for me. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't miss Danny still and that I don't cry over his death and that I don't wish it never happened and all that. Of course I do. My wife and I will never pass the September 3rd without battling a little bit, you know? So it's real. The loss is real. You lost partners along the way. I lost 5 line of duty deaths along the way of guys I worked with. Danny was my first, and he was my closest. Like he was the guy. He was actually my partner. That 4.5 years we worked together. The other guys that were killed were guys that I worked with. I trained maybe, which was hard. If you lose a kid, you train. It creates its own animal of guilt and doubt. And did I not train him or her well enough? Tactically, did I? That's a separate beast, you know. But the important thing for us as believers is twofold. The first thing is God sovereign? Is God sovereign? Is like either he is or he isn't. And if he is, then do I have the right understanding of who I am now in relationship to that? So you've gone through losses, and I'm gonna. I don't. You and I have never talked. We've never met. But I'm just gonna take a stab here. That chances are you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you hadn't had losses in your career. Would that be fair to say? I'm interviewing you now.
Well, I would say definitely it took, and that's kind of why I preface the beginning of all these interviews with kind of let's get to the darkness, the pain, the bad parts. It took those losses to make me actually look at my faith and be like, what the heck do I believe about this? Why did it happen? Is there
Yeah.
really a God in charge? It started those questions and started me down those paths, certainly, yeah.
Right. Right. So there's good coming out of it even in your life, is my point.
Yeah.
And you and I now have this instant connection in life. I'm looking at you through a phone screen right now, but you and I have a connection in life that only brothers and sisters who have gone through what you and I have gone through have with each other. Period. No one else gets this. Like the general public is never going to understand this. Now, certainly our service members who've lost members in combat, that kind of thing, yeah, we're in the same vein as them. But you know what I'm saying. So there's already fruit that comes out of this trauma. It's beauty from ashes. It's God being able to take something so terrible and turn it into something positive. And the same promise of Romans 8:28 that God got me to embrace, if you will, to go, okay, I'm open to that. That same promise is there for you. It's there for Danny's widow. It's there for every other police officer and person on planet Earth. We all have a choice of what we do when we experience loss and trauma.
So take me to that car the first day you get in with your now wife,
Well,
then Danny's ex-partner. Did she have a faith background at that time too? How did she see that loss? Where did you guys, how did you kind of get through that initially?
she was raised Catholic, but she had faith in Jesus. I shouldn't say but, and she had faith in Jesus. I know a lot of Catholics who are saved. I know a lot of professing Christians who aren't, I think, but not to get judgmental, but to sort of assess, So I'm not trying to pick on religions here, but she'd been raised Catholic. She had a relationship with Jesus, and as we started to become close and talk about things, um, you know, the night that the shooting happened, that Danny was killed, they were sitting in their car, and Danny said to her, if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen tonight. And she said, "What do you mean?" He goes, It's going to happen tonight." And then he joked because he carried a Smith and Wesson, she carried a Beretta. We had a choice of at that time of which one we carried, and he said, "We'll see who gets off more rounds, me with my Smith or you with your Beretta." You know. Um, Later, when I went to meet with Andrea, very early, first day or second day, I brought up, so Andrea, and I know it's hard right now, but I want to ask you about like life insurance policies and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any idea? And she said, "Ward, it's the weirdest thing. I just went in the closet and opened up a box. There was a box in the closet I hadn't seen before. And I opened it up, and right on top was a sheet of paper, and it listed everything I need for Danny, and all of his insurance, health, benefit, everything was in there, and it was all he had just gone through and gotten it all squared away." And she said, "I don't know," because he was a pack rat. He was a mess when it came to organization, but this was there waiting for me when I went to look for it. There was a lot. There's just a lot that went on, kind of underneath the scenes. So yeah, my wife. I don't recall specific conversations about about God and Danny's death necessarily, but I know we had talks about God as we grew closer. She was really battling depression bad. Survivor's guilt is horrible. Um, I tell people, I tell officers, if you're working and you and your partner walk up and encounter 9 armed gunmen with AK-47s, and you get in a shootout, and your partner's killed, and you kill every one of those 9 guys, you're going to have guilt that you lived. Like, even though you did better than Bruce Willis in Die Hard, you're still going to come back with this. I should have died. How come I'm alive? You're just going to wrestle with this. That's our nature. That's who we are as people. That's how we're wired. So as I knew that I started to like fall in love with her, and we started to have a relationship, it became more important for me to explore where her faith was, because I knew by this point in my life that I was never going to get connected to a gal that didn't have faith and didn't have the same measure of faith as I did. And so I established that early on that she did. Um, I,
You
I don't.
know, as far as the depression that she had set in because of the death, did looking back on it through these years, I'm sure you guys have talked about it. Did her faith play a part in bringing her out of that at all? Or was there a moment where, so clearly you mentioned she was Catholic, so that sounds like that has changed along the way at some point.
Yeah, she is she's walking with Christ. We started early on in our marriage, reading the Bible together. She had never read the Bible before. She'd always gone to church and read the little missalettes, and that was it. So we read the Bible. I was working graveyard. She was working day shift. We would write. We would write to each other. We had spiral. We still have the notebook somewhere. We had like 6 spiral notebooks filled with letters to each other, where she would read a passage and then she would, hey, I read this and I have questions about this. And so I would respond back, and that's how we communicated. So her faith is very much alive today. She's Christian. She has a relationship with Christ. We're both Christians. So the depression for her, this is going to be this is one of the things I've discovered. Look, I'm not a licensed clinician. Okay. But when we experience trauma, the thing that wounds us is the helplessness. That needs to sink in. The thing that wounds us is our helplessness. So the event that when you had 2 line of duty deaths in one day on a time scale, that was a very short moment of time compared to how many years you've lived. The wounding of it is the loss of it is the helplessness that you carry, that you couldn't stop it. And on some level, we've never talked about this. You went down some magical thinking, if only I had been there, if only I could have been there, if only, right? Like I did that with Danny. If only I could have been there, like I could have maybe, no, I would have been killed too. And so we try to cope with our helplessness by coming up with scenarios where we would have made a difference. But that's just magic thinking, and that's foolish. We got to let that go. So that the helplessness that we encounter during a grief, during a loss of any kind, even if you're a victim of something, you're a victim of an abuse of some kind. That's a helpless time in your life, and for the rest of your life, the next helpless incident that you experience is going to connect to that. They're going to come together. That's how depression gets out of control. It's usually not just the one thing. It's starting to connect all of these helpless incidents together. If that makes
Gotcha.
sense.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Okay. So take us through. So that was, we started with the riots, went back
Yeah.
to Danny was before that.
Right.
So now coming out of the situation with Danny, you're married to your wife. You come into the riots. You kind of walked us through what those looked like a little bit. Let's say, the situation with the lady that you heard calling out for help, that you weren't able to go back and help. Your faith in the riots, did it give you a different perspective on, again, where I would go with my constant questioning is, what the heck, Lord? How could you be using this for good? What are we doing here? Are we doing any good? Was there any kind of conflict there, or were you so solid in your faith at that point that it kind of took you through that and kept you strong, and you really didn't have any, questions or questioning or questions of God, that kind of thing?
The riots initially, I would have to say, although I don't think I've ever phrased this before. I think the searching I did was because I was questioning God, because I was questioning humanity and why am I even a cop? Why there's so much evil, like it's just out of control. It wasn't, but I never had a thought I'm not going to have faith anymore. That wasn't it. It was just more like trying to make sense out of it. Like I don't understand this. So yeah, on some level I was wrestling with that, and on some level I have wrestled with that over and over through losses. I have had health. I got some serious health things going on. My wife has cancer right now. She had breast cancer earlier. She beat that. She's got blood cancer now that she'll have forever. It's not like we live this life of a Pollyanna where everything's rosy. So yeah, this is a constant question where we have to understand how does God see all this? Well, man, read the Old Testament. Read Isaiah. Do you think we're living in any new times right now? Do you think the evil that we see is any different than what the world has seen before us? The truth is, God had a plan and we blew it through our own choices. And that's the result. The result of the trauma and the losses, there's not a radio call that a cop can respond to, there's not a medical call that an EMT or a paramedic can respond to that isn't related to sin in some way. Maybe not the individual sin that caused it, but there's sin nonetheless. Sometimes you could be walking down the road and someone can throw a rock and hit a mud puddle next to you and you get splashed on. Other times you could be throwing rocks through a window of a house and you're doing bad stuff and you get cut by glass. But everything that we encounter, it's because of sin. That's why the world is broken, and that's why we're waiting for Jesus to come again. So yeah, this has all made me like really try to understand. It's not like I can go to somebody in grief and just tell them, "Well, gosh, all things are going to work together for good to you." I can't do that. At some point, hopefully in our relationship, we may be able to have that talk. But more than anything, my role with people now, especially as a chaplain, is just to be present. I'm here for you.
So what
You
does
know,
that look like now? The riots, was that toward the tail end? I don't remember. You
that
said you retired in what, 2006? I think it was.
yeah, that was '92. So that was
Oh, so
roughly
yeah.
halfway ish.
Okay. So take me to were you a chaplain before you retired, or you retired and
No,
then you became a chaplain?
yeah. So as I worked, I got, we got really involved. I became ordained as an elder in a church, and I was still working at the time. We hosted Bible study groups for adults and for college age individuals. So we were very active. My wife did children's ministry. When I retired, we moved out here to the Kansas City area. I served as an associate pastor for a few years. Um, and then that's when my wife developed breast cancer, and so I had to step out of ministry to take care of her and the boys because they were still in school. And then so that door kind of closed, and then it was really we had moved to Arkansas for a few years to help with her mom, and then we moved back to Kansas City. And I was literally out for a walk one day listening to a sermon, and I heard God speak to me, "Ward, become a chaplain." And so that's what started me down this road. And now my wife had told me, I think 3 times, even while I was a police officer, "Ward, you need to become a chaplain." And when I retired, she told me again, "You need to become a chaplain." Every time she told me that, I listened to her because I think a wise man will always listen to his wife, right?
Oh boy, here we go. Yeah.
And so I listened and I would research. And every time I went to research, it was like, yeah, come to our university and get your master's. And I dropped out of Long Beach State in my senior year to join LAPD. I'm a few units shy of my bachelor's. I'm not the guy that's going to go back and spend thousands of dollars to get his bachelor's degree and then spend thousands more to get a master's degree. It's not going to happen. So every time I looked into becoming a chaplain, it's like, no, I'm not that big a believer in education from that standpoint. I'm a believer that God appoints and ordains whom He chooses. And so when He told me now for the first time to become a chaplain, I went right home and got on my phone and started doing research. And well, lo and behold, there are now credentialing agencies out there. They may have been out there all along, but I never knew about them, where they're not requiring you to go to college, but they're solid organizations. So that's what I did. And then I just started knocking on police departments out here saying, "Hey, I'm a chaplain. Can you use me?" And Overland Park picked me up, and I'm telling you, God's doing huge things through our chaplaincy program here now in a lot of great ways. So it's been really good. So I do call outs, suicides, infant deaths, any kind of a death. I do ride alongs with the officers. I had an officer request that I marry him. I had an officer request that I bury his dad. I had, so I have all these opportunities now through relationship of being around that I'm engaged. I'm still exposed to trauma in my role as a chaplain. The dreams that cops have of your gun not firing, I have those again now. They've all come back.
Well,
You know,
tell me this, because I know a lot of chaplains,
yeah,
a lot of chaplains that were not police officers, obviously,
correct.
and the reaction to chaplains is not great.
No,
By most officers, I have to admit, especially the reaction to chaplains who really have zero idea what they're stepping into when they come into the department, and what we're like, how we talk, how we react
right.
to things, how we see the world. So with you coming in, having been there, done that, having such a history of where you worked and what you've been through, was there a more openness to letting you
Yeah,
be a chaplain and to officers accepting you as you came in, or did you have just as rough a time probably as other chaplains that I know that have not had great experiences?
I would say I have instant credibility as an individual. So people are ready to, they're very ready to like, oh, he was a cop in LA. Yeah, let's talk. When I go on ride-alongs, the doors have opened right away for me. Now I know that's not the case with other chaplains that I've brought on board to help, in our program. Um, Part of it is breaking into the culture, even though I have this sort of insider um, knowledge. I'm still an outsider. I didn't come from here, so uh, I'm not going to tell you it's just an easy overnight thing. It really is. It's a being a chaplain in your training for chaplaincy. Here's what it's described as. It's described as a ministry of presence. So you have to be present. You have to show up. You have to be available. You have to be around. You have to show up at the good things. I've got a retirement tomorrow of a sergeant. He didn't ask. I'm not doing anything officially, but I'm going to show up because it's important that people see me around on the good event, because I don't want to just show up on the bad ones. I want them to see me there on the good ones too, right? So yeah, chaplaincy is all about being present and being available, and just supporting people regardless of their faith. And that's the hard thing for many Christians to embrace chaplaincy, because this is not about sharing Jesus. However, I've done more sharing of Jesus as a chaplain than I ever did as a pastor, because the doors are just open. But that's not my primary motive. The best example I can give out of the Bible is the Good Samaritan. He's this guy's beaten and left for dead along the side of the road, and everybody passes him by, right? And the Good Samaritan finally stops and helps him and takes him and gets him settled into a place to stay, and he pays for his lodging, and he pays for his meals, and he tells the innkeeper, whatever this guy needs, just rack the bill up and I'll come back and pay it. And he goes on his way. That's the heart of a chaplain right there. There was nothing expected in return for that. That Good Samaritan wasn't asking for anything in return. He wasn't saying, I'm trying to get you to come to my church. I'm trying to get you to believe in Jesus. He's simply ministering and helping the person that needed it. And that's the heart of a chaplain. So, yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I enjoy the fact that my background gives me the foot in the door. And I can tell you on the ride-alongs that I have, we always have very good, easy dialogue about stuff. And I've been transparent with the officers I ride with that I have had suicidal ideations. I want them to know that, and I get officers come up to me and in confidence say, "Hey, that was me 2 months ago. I'm glad you shared that." So I'm also involved. We do trauma retreats now. We're part of a it's the First Responder Network, FRSN. They're based out of California. They run trauma retreats, West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, WCPR. These retreats are 1 week long. They are residential treatment programs that are run by licensed clinicians, licensed psychologists who are culturally competent to deal with cops. How many I've heard stories of cops going in to talk to a counselor, and they start recounting, yeah, I was at this call and this kid's head got cut off, and the counselor breaks down and starts to cry and said, I can't help you.
Yeah,
Well,
the counselor needs counseling from counseling us. Yeah.
yes. So we need to find culturally competent counselors to go to. Well, anyway, This residential treatment program brings up to 6 first responders in, and it's all first responders, not all cops, but firefighters, paramedics, EMTs. We even had a flight nurse in a recent one. And these individuals come in, and they're at the end of their ropes. They're suicidal. They've attempted suicide, and for a week, we get to surround them with people who are all volunteers to be there for them, and start giving them tools on how to deal with their trauma. They're provided with things like EMDR by the clinicians. They're given tools on the container method of when you're on a call and something horrible happens, put it in your container. Okay, this is terrible. I see these dead kids. I can't dwell on that right now. I'm just going to put this in my container, knowing that you got to later on go back and unpack that container and examine it and deal with it. But it gives you a tool to use, and it gives you support where we stay in touch with each other. And so I've been in touch with a guy from a retreat about a year ago, and we just had a great talk today because he had some things that happened in his life, and he lives hours away. But he goes, "Hey, do you have time to talk?" I go, "Sure, I got time to talk," and we had good dialogue. So I'm really involved in the WCPR stuff now too, and this is something for all of the first responders out there who might hear this. If you're at the end of your rope, man, reach out. We have tools. Now it's expensive. It's like $5,500 to attend one of these, but a lot of agencies will cover the cost, and there are sometimes there's scholarships available and that kind of thing too. So, and if you did this privately, it would probably be more like literally like $20,000 for this kind of treatment. This 1 week program is the equivalent of like 6 months of therapy.
Wow.
That's what I hear over and over. So it's a really good deal. So that's a plug for anybody out there who feels like they're at the end of their rope and they've seen too much or dealt with too much. Reach out.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll put that link in the show notes on the podcast. So
Okay.
when you mention reach out, I'm curious. One thing keeps coming up in my head. I'm curious what your advice would be. So you've been an officer, you've been there, done that, have had suicidal ideation. You've started out in faith, you've left the faith a little bit, you've come back, you've heard the voice of God. Talk to me about cops, first responders, and church. So the reason I bring that up is first responders who, let's say they're like you and they hear the voice of God talking to them, or they hear a calling during a dark time, or they're wanting to explore more. And then, I've been to my fair share of churches that you get around the people in the church and there's no first responders there, and they're happy, slappy, rainbows, puppy dogs, everything's great. It's a Sunday and, oh, life is wonderful. And God, they've never, seen life from a different perspective or different side. And then the first responder comes into whatever small group or these group of people who just, do not understand, not fault of their own,
No.
obviously, but just
Right.
cannot see stuff. But they don't know why that person jokes the way they do, why they talk the way they do. This person is brash. This person is off-putting. Just a different personality. So,
Right.
if an officer is in that position, is there a good way that you would recommend to reach out to a church, or is there any kind of path you would take? Because I've talked to a few guys who have been like, you know what, I believe there's something there. I would like to explore it, but no, not church. One-on-one maybe. So clearly that's a path. One-on-one discipleship with friends or a coffee shop or something like that. But if they really wanted to get into a community, is there a good way to go about that? Is there something you'd recommend in that instance?
I think finding other like-minded individuals, finding other cops who are believers, and starting there, starting a group where hey, let's get together and have coffee and talk about God. That's what I would recommend. I'm a look. I believe in the church as far as the organized church. I believe in home churches. There's a big movement right now of home churches. In fact, the fastest growing Christian church in the world today is in Iran. Crazy. It's
Yeah, I
all
didn't
it's
know that.
all it's all undercover, and it's all two or three people meeting together. They don't have Bibles, there's a whole movement of that's taking place. It's even happening here in Kansas City. It's probably happening around you somewhere where there's home groups that are springing up, you get into this whole thing that the home group, most of the pastors that are in this home group movement have probably been burned by a church at some point, and so they've gone to this as an alternative, and that's fine. Um, but I'd say you just have to find the right pick for you. If you have other believers in your agency, find out where they go to church, if they go to church, and start going to church with them. Form your own little groups within a church, And if that's not possible, then find those that are like-minded in your agency that would be willing to get together once a week and just chew the fat and talk about God and talk about these questions we have. And reaching out is the most important thing. The biggest sign of someone who's struggling with PTSD is isolation. That's what I was doing when I was at my darkest. I was isolating, and that's what all of us do when we start going down those roads. We tend to isolate ourselves because we just we don't want to deal with people. So we got to find others that are like-minded, and we're out here. We're out here. We're everywhere. We know who they are. We just have to connect the dots. So I think I'm meeting them in my department. Uh, I'm actually hopeful that I can start sort of a home church at the police department. That's my prayer to God right now. God, open these doors. It's hard because cities don't want Jesus in their mix. They're too political for that. So there's hurdles I have to get across, but I'm really been like praying about that. Of God, I'd love to get together with those guys and gals that you're talking about that would like to explore things, but they're not going to go to a church. Well, let's get together to go to a coffee shop and let's kick this stuff around.
Well, I
So
mean, the church isn't a building. The church is the body.
that's
So
that's right.
your being at the coffee shop is the church. You're just at a
That's right.
different spot. That's all.
That's right. Has got nothing to do with the building. That's right.
Right.
So
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else? We've been over a lot. Is there anything else, if there are first responders listening, that you would want to
so
leave them with, advice wise or life wise or faith wise,
the
or anything,
the hardest thing for us as cops is that we are warriors. At times we are violent people. And that's what makes it hard for us to walk as Christians, because we're in this world where we're fighting for our life, we're taking life, or whatever, all that struggles going on, and then it's like, believe in God. I think we see so much negative that we've missed the point of God's of how He can use us. David had an army of men who were described as misfits. If you read in the Bible of what David's men were like, they were grumblers, complainers, misfits. They were in debt. They were a bunch of cops. That's who they were. Um, David had grand plans to build a temple for God, and God told him, "No, you got too much blood on your hands. You can't do that." So have realistic expectations, I guess. You know, and find other. I go into stations and someone will drop an F bomb and they'll go, "Oh, sorry, Chap," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? That's not going to offend me." So don't worry about that stuff. But yeah, I think it's just the fact that we get exposed to so much trauma that we get jaded. I'm jaded. If you're a cop and you're not jaded, you're not a good cop. I'm going to tell you that right now. So we're all jaded. So embrace it. It's okay. We've seen a lot of stuff.
And I would say, maybe you can back me up on this, because I've been in the place that you've been in where I've heard, again, my story is out there. It's a little different, but I've heard the voice. I've had the talk. I've heard God. He's told me to do this, do that. I've had questions. I think a lot of times people will think of that, not just first responders, but anybody who has that kind of impact or anybody who has that kind of experience, and will think, oh, I'm just crazy. I was just talking to myself in my head, whatever.
Right.
You, it sounds like, would back me up in saying, look, if you hear what you think is the voice of God, our God is spiritual, supernatural. This is not something that you can just put off. This is probably, if you think it's the voice of God, it very well may be the voice of God talking to you.
That's right. And the most important thing to do when we hear what we recognize as God's voice is to compare it to what His Word says. God cannot contradict Himself. So if God tells me to go do a mass shooting, and I'm going to open up my Bible and go, no, that doesn't wash. But if God tells me to trust Him, that all things can work together for good to those who love Him, that's His promise. I can say, okay, And part of this walk, look, Jesus over and over said, you got to have the faith of a child. When we go down this road of intellectual pursuit, which believe me, I've been as deep into as anybody, going down all these intellectual little rabbit holes and everything else. That's not where we meet God. Okay.
Oh, those will jack you up, man.
Yeah. It's
All those
so
questions,
where
all
we
those
meet him
things.
is when we simply go, okay, I trust. I don't understand, but I'm willing to trust. And that's what I did that night. Was I didn't understand how. I even challenged him in my prayer. God, you mean to tell me, God, that you're going to take the death of my best friend and use it to good? I challenged him on it. He said, trust me. And then now look at my testimony. And it's about him. It's his story. It's not my story. It's his story. It's his story of what he did in my life because I trusted him. And he'll do the same for anyone who trusts him.
First, I apologize. I am still learning how to do this podcast thing. And yes, we had some technical difficulties there at the end. But I do wonder what you're thinking. Maybe you're not fine. Maybe you're not good. Maybe you're not great. All those things we tend to say for that Sunday morning show if we go at all. Maybe things aren't going well. Maybe you don't think God is working this thing that you're going through for anything, really. If that's where you are, can you say them with me? Can you admit that? Are you brave enough to just tell God honestly how you feel? If you're there, if you're where Ward used to be, do you believe? Do you believe that God can use all things for good, even drinking, death, and destruction? You heard him say it. Ward lived it, and he believes without question that yes, God works all things together for good. Of course, for those who trust in God. Don't believe that? Don't agree? Hit me up, let me know. chad.campese@gmail.com. That address will be in the show notes. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Let me know where you're at, and I am not hard to find. And if you know someone going through it, would you share this episode with them? Would you help save a life? Would you tell them what Ward said and show them what God showed him? All right, guys, until next time, I will catch you on the other side.